to those who think that if President Trump wins, which I hope he does, that we can get a better deal. You won't. You got to get 60 votes in the United States Senate. So to my Republican colleagues, this is a historic moment to reform the border in a way that would give tools to the next president they don't have today.
Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday adding to a chorus of Republican senators sending a message to House Speaker Mike Johnson to take a deal on border reform. There were hopes that progress might have even made over top lawmakers made with President Biden at the White House yesterday, including Speaker Johnson. But Johnson quickly dashed those hopes last night when he said he has been frequently talking border reform with Donald Trump, who was urging him not to compromise. Johnson saying the ex-president is, quote, not wrong. Joining our conversation, one of the lawmakers at that White House meeting yesterday, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of California. Congressman, thanks for being with us. There is progress, as I understand it today, on a short-term funding bill. Anything on border negotiations and funding for Ukraine and Israel?
Well, remember, first of all, Connecticut, not California, but much more importantly, the moment of reckoning is when the Senate passes their bill, which they will with very strong bipartisan support, and it will have, as Lindsey Graham himself said, probably the best border deal the Republicans are ever going to get. It will have money for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Indo-PACOM, and then it comes to the House. That's the moment of reckoning, right? Because there is a substantial majority in the House to pass that bill. And again, it would be historic. It would be this country standing up for Ukraine and getting a border and immigration deal done, which is really hard. The problem, of course, is the speaker is, as you just reported, talking to Trump a lot. Trump is interested in maximum chaos. And the more severe problem is that the Republicans have a very, very narrow majority. And the 2 or 3 people who may decide they hate this deal so much that Mike Johnson should no longer be speaker have the tool to make that happen. So when that Senate deal passes, the speaker needs to think really hard about whether he wants to take a choice and maybe do a deal with Democrats that actually allow him to survive and get Ukraine done, get the border deal done, or whether he wants to get none of that done, and how he'll explain that to the American public.
Congressman, how important is that aid to Ukraine and Israel that's being held up? Give us a sense of what that aid actually means.
Well, you know, the conflicts are very different, but they share one quality, right? Hamas attacking Israel is a totalitarian, religiously driven, murderous cult, really, that brutalized Israel on October 7th, set aside everything that has happened since. You know, if Israel doesn't have the resources to fight that, and if the Ukrainians, who are dealing with an expansionist, totalitarian murderer, Vladimir Putin, if we don't send a clear signal that we will not allow that kind of thing, those kinds of people, those kinds of groups to prevail, President Xi in China notices. The mullahs in Iran notice. North Korea notices. That has implications for Taiwan. It has implications for stability in the Middle East. It has implications for the very many Iranian proxy groups that are creating instability all over the Middle East. This is really a critical moment. And I get it that, you know, a lot of Americans maybe sitting around the dinner table don't fully feel that. But the problem is, of course, if the forces of authoritarianism get emboldened, history tells us that eventually U.S. military, whether it's World War I, World War II, eventually the U.S. military is involved, and that will have a profound effect on kitchen tables around this country.
Congressman, one of the dynamics that we are watching is this interplay between House Republicans and Senate Republicans. Here's how Senator Thom Tillis reacted to Speaker Johnson just today.
Hi, Senator.
Hi.
What do you make of President Trump telling Speaker Johnson that he shouldn't support the border deal?
You know, I respectfully disagree with the president. I mean, he could not have possibly seen what we're negotiating. When the bill is released and everyone, particularly conservatives and President Trump, sees the tools that will be available to a President Trump should he win the election, to lose this opportunity to get it passed into law, I think is malpractice.
We'll talk about the substance of what is actually in there. It is striking to me, though, one, that you have Senate Republicans seeming to be very, very frustrated with House Republicans and the way in which they do not seem to understand what is possible in the U.S. Senate. It strikes me that is in large part because there are members of the House GOP caucus who aren't really interested in getting anything done so much as they're interested in grandstanding on this issue.
That's exactly right. And I mean, let's be clear about this. The majority of Republicans, I think, would agree with Senate Republicans. You know, they're legislators. They understand that when you don't have the presidency, you don't have the Senate. You take what your colleagues in the Senate are saying is a very good deal. There's two strains that are opposed to that. Number one are those that are slavishly devoted to Donald Trump, and nothing else matters. If Donald Trump says this is a bad deal for whatever reason, and that reason is usually because Donald Trump is looking after his own self-interest, they will parrot those talking points. And then, of course, you've got the sort of chaos agents, or the people who are here because they believe that somehow they have the leverage to get far more than what the senators have been able to do it. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, does Speaker Johnson decide to do away with the, let's just use the analogy, the firearm that every single member of the Republican caucus now holds to end his speakership? The path to getting that done, and I think he would find receptive negotiating on the part of Democrats, is to say, let's agree to do away with this one-member motion to vacate that allows the looniest of the loonies to end that man's speakership. Until that goes away, we're going to be having these conversations and not getting anything done till the cows come home.